Well, let's start this plenary session for our annual conference of the Italian Academy of Management, SIMA, Società Italiana di Management. This is a very important event for the Italian management scholars community with many participants, and I must be grateful to the organizers for setting up so well this organization with many people in moments in which we cannot meet in person, so we have to go virtual. But still everything is working very well. And everybody seems very pleased about all the arrangements that have been done. Now we have a plenary session with a very important speaker, Haridimos Tsoukas. Not sure I'm speaking Greek in a correct way, but
perfectly, better than the British.
Okay. Okay, good. So Haridimos Tsoukas is, as I said, a very important, widely recognized scholar. He contributed fundamentally to the studies in management, writing about key issues in our disciplines. Not only issues about contents like leadership, organizations, risk, and so on, but also methodological issues, and providing a fundamental contribution to the way we do research in management. I will not mention his bibliometric statistics, but they are impressive. Haridimos is not just a prolific scholar with many publications, but is a really impactful scholar, as his citations and impact indicators show very well. Haridimos Tsoukas is a professor at the University of Warwick and also associated with the University of Cyprus. And is going to give a speech to us about theory that makes a difference. And this is a wow topic for management scholars, because we all would like to develop theory that makes a difference. And a subtitle is, what can phenomenological management research contribute? And this, again, I think is a great topic, not so common, not so widely discussed, but phenomenological management research, though being under discussed, in my opinion, deserves much more. So Haridimos Tsoukas is going to tell us what this type of research can help, how this type of research can help in making a difference. So we are all very keen to listen to you, Haridimos. The word is yours.
Thank you, Antonella. Thank you very much for this kind invitation. It's a great honor for me to have the chance to address the Italian Academy of Management. I would love to have been in Palermo. Anytime I'm in Italy, I feel at home. I never visited Sicily though, so I was very much looking forward to it, but it has to be next time. For the time being, we will have to limit ourselves to online communication. So thank you again. I chose this topic because it's very dear to me for many years now. And I want to share with you some of my thinking about theory that makes a difference. The question, of course, when one puts it in those terms, the question is, there are few things that need to be clarified straight away. One is, what is theory? And when we say it makes it to make a difference, to whom, for what? These are not to be taken for granted. So, and I'm hoping to shed some light on these two questions. And of course, how does theory make a difference to practice? I'm not saying that phenomenology is the only way to make a difference, but it is my preferred way, and I want to show you some of its advantages. So let me see first when we say our theories make a difference and make an impact, what do we have in mind? Then when we put it in those terms, the question comes, why is it that practitioners often do not feel that they gain from our research? There have been many papers, many people have discussed it, and of course, I don't have in mind the kind of commonsensical arguments you often hear, but I have in mind more scholarly arguments as to how can we be more impactful? But we seem often not to be as much as we would have liked. So one question is, what do practitioners experience out in the real world that we fail to reflect in our theories? If our theories do not somehow are not thought to be that much useful to make a difference, why is it so? Could it be that our ontological and epistemological assumptions artificialize what we study, stripping out most of what matters? And this is, you can see that I'm focusing directly on our ontological epistemological assumptions. This is not the only way to approach it. Another way might be how we produce knowledge. Another way might be how we communicate knowledge. But my approach is how we structure our knowledge in terms of the kind of commitments we make at the ontological epistemological level. And the question then is, if you want to make a difference, is how can we grasp and illuminate the logic of practice? Because if our theories aim to address practitioners, they have somehow to relate to their concerns, what they experience in the world. Then the question is, how can our theories reflect what practitioners experience in the world? And for this, we have to grasp, illuminate the logic of practice, which is Bourdieu's term, a very nice term, and this is what I want to focus on. Let me, for a moment, share with you some a practitioner's concerns. This is Professor Vail here, when he used to be the dean of a business school in America. And then he realized that when he put on a different hat, not the academic's hat, but the dean's hat, a manager's hat, then things appear different. As a dean, he said, I quickly learned that the good things that we management professors were saying managers should do are all time-dependent processes. There was nothing I could do, I learned sometimes painfully, that did not have its own rhythms and pacings, pauses and accelerations, beginnings and endings. I will not read the whole of it. I want you to get an idea. Here we have someone who is the head of an organization, a business school in the US, in a very competitive environment. And one of the things he shares with us is the temporal flow of his activities. Everything I do, he tells us here, is time dependent. Whatever I do, I need to synchronize myself with the pacings and timings of other people. Now, if you look at our theories, we don't do justice to time. Far from it. Most of our models tend to be propositional statements, if X, then Y, in circumstances Z, which tend to be timeless. And of course, if we generate knowledge of that type, don't expect someone like Peter Vail to tell us that that this is beneficial to him, because clearly one of his important concerns here, time, is not addressed in many of our theories. Then Edgar Morin, the French sociologist whom I very much like, he talked about blind intelligence, which destroys unities and totalities. It isolates all objects from their environment. It cannot conceive of the inseparable link between the observer and the observed. And I will stop here. Again, Morin here is telling us something that practitioners feel, that they are not outside what they manage, any situation they are part of, far from it. And therefore, they need to develop smart intelligence, not blind intelligence, by destroying the unity and the totality of the phenomenon that they face. And of course, the great master Aristotle, who talked about wisdom, which is not concerned only with universals, things which are valid across space and time. To be wise, he noted, one must also be familiar with a particular. since wisdom has to do with action, and the sphere of action is constituted by particulars. So 3 points so far I would like you to keep. One is, practitioners tell us often that anything they do is embedded in time. Therefore, if we want to be responsive to what they experience, we have to find ways of incorporating time in our theorizing. Secondly, if we want to avoid blind intelligence, we need to be somehow do justice to the unity, the totality of the phenomena we investigate, rather than be quick to split them apart. This is what Morin advocates. And Aristotle advises us that if people of action, men and women who take action, he had politicians in mind, but it's the same for organizations. They don't deal with universals only, with timeless propositions. They deal with particulars, something which is with situational uniqueness. So how can we take these into account? Let me make some preliminary comments, which is more to remind you, because we know this. I'm not saying anything new. When we speak of theory, we talk about sets of conceptually based claims to account for, interpret, and explain the world. In other words, we come up with conceptual frameworks, with concepts put together in some coherent way in order to explain what we see in the world. When we want to make a difference, we want to make a difference to practice. Management research is one of those types of research which is practically oriented. It is constitutively so, unlike more traditional sociology or psychology, which is not necessarily practice-oriented. Management is practice-oriented. By studying organizations and management, there is an implicit assumption that we want to improve the way organizations function and management operates. Then the question arises, how is formal knowledge related to practice? The kind of knowledge that we generate as scholars, how is it linked to what people do in practice? There are two main views here. One view, the traditional view, is that knowledge is instrumental. It's a bit like holding an instrument, a knife. I'm giving you an instrument, and if you apply it properly, then you will get the result you want. So you don't know much about managing change, or you would like to know more about marketing, you would like to know more about accounting or whatever. And here we come with some propositions which are valid, which have been validated by research. And if we hand it over to you, that will be a useful instrument to you to segment your markets better, to devise better strategies, to design your organization better. Another view, which is the view that I hold, I'm not saying that the first view is wrong. I'm saying only it is limited. There's another way of viewing the relationship between knowledge and practice, and that is that relationship is internal. The kind of concepts we generate are internally related to what people do. So if you, for example, if we adopt a different vocabulary to describe ourselves, then we will constitute a different phenomenon. That's what I mean by internally related, because the kind of phenomena we study in management in organizations are human phenomena constituted by language to a large extent. So the way we understand things. If we start understanding things differently, then obviously the phenomenon will appreciate different things in the phenomenon. If you think, for example, that organizations are structures primarily, then you will not pay attention to process. If you think of organizations as being in process terms, then you want to better understand how organization emerges, which is not your concern if you view organizations as structures. This is what Gareth Morgan did to a large extent with his classic book, Images of Organization, trying to educate our attention to appreciate different things. By changing the vocabulary, we change, hopefully, the practice. And I want to expand on this a little bit more. So traditionally, we have seen two main approaches. Well, actually, the first has been the dominant approach in the field, what I call objectivist or representationalist approach. And I'm going to argue for an activist theorizing, which is based on phenomenology. I will try to be quick. I will describe first the objectivist approach, but I will try to be quick because I think this has been, that kind of summary and critique has been well argued before. From an objectivist point of view, the organizations, any phenomenon we study, it is a discrete entity with distinct properties. And we are the subjects, the scholars, outside the object, and the main relationship is that between subject and object. So we, the subjects, study the objects. And what we do, we represent cognitively through our research instruments those pre-given features of these discrete objects, and we try to come up with models of explanation, usually in our field of a contingency type. Now, that is, I want you also to appreciate that this is the scientific way of thinking about it, which in a way mirrors the way practitioners ought to be thinking about the world. So the practitioner is situated against the world, against the object. Remember, from Latin, object is object. It is something which is opposite to you. So you stand opposite to something as a practitioner. You try to model it in your mind internally in order to select the best course of action. So in that sense, theory and practice are homologous. They tend to be mirror images. Ideally, scholars and practitioners think similarly. The difference is that scholars have systematic procedures for validating their claims. In this type of thinking, it is a dualistic way of thinking, simplistic in my view. I can explain this more, but at least forget the simplistic for the time being. It is the dualisms I want you to keep. Mind is versus body, stability versus change, routine versus novelty, facts versus values. So if you approach the world in objectivist or representationalist terms, you have you are already into the field of dualisms, and you have to split things apart and to engage in what Morin is advocating against, which is the blind type of intelligence. What objectivists leave out are the following. The objectivist image underestimates the meaningful totality in which practitioners are immersed. We are all teachers. Anytime we go to class, we don't scratch our head to say, hang on a minute, where am I now? Is this a class? What is a class? Is this a whiteboard? What should I do with a whiteboard? Is this a PowerPoint? What am I going to do with a PowerPoint? I might be raising these questions if I enter the cockpit of an airplane, if I know nothing about planes. But as a practitioner in my profession, these questions never arise. Why? Because as a practitioner, I'm already immersed in a meaningful totality in which I take things for granted, in which I'm embedded in a background which has already been defined for me. I'm not the one who will define what the PowerPoint does in class or what the whiteboard is going to do for me in class. The second thing that this type of thinking ignores is situational uniqueness. As I said earlier, as Aristotle advised us many centuries ago, it is practitioners are faced with uniqueness. They're not, it's not enough to suggest to them like the following. Let me give you an example. So if you want to manage change successfully, here are two types of propositional statements. The chance of success improves when intervention and participation are used to install a decision, and declines when edicts and persuasion are applied. In other words, it is better to involve people when you make change rather than to impose change on people. And I won't go to the second, it's broadly similar. Fair enough. Okay, if I'm the manager and I want to introduce change, this kind of timeless proposition that it is better to involve people than to impose things on people, does it apply to me at this point in time in my context? That question cannot be answered in advance. It is only the person in context who knows what to do. But those propositional statements, precisely because they're abstract statements, they do not necessarily apply to my situation. So situational uniqueness, which is what should I do now, it is not something that is addressed. And of course, it abstracts away from time, but I won't dwell on this because I discussed it earlier. Now, I want now to move on. For me, to sum up, for me, the objectivist type of theorizing does not produce really impactful knowledge which will make a difference. I will explain to you later what I mean by making a difference, but I can tell you right now that by making a difference is making me see the world differently. Give me insights to do my job better. That's what I have in mind. But if you give me kind of propositional, timeless statements, I'm not necessarily certain that this is going to be helpful to me for the reasons I explained. This is where phenomenology is helpful, it seems to me. Why? Because the basic principles of phenomenology are well suited to address the concerns of practitioners, to make theory more relevant to what they experience. So what is important to study from a phenomenological point of view, it is not something in itself, but how something appears to someone. That comes from the very word phenomenon. The phenomenon is what appears to consciousness, how I experience my job, my tasks, my organization. So the tasks and the jobs and the organization are not objectively defined, but only insofar as they appear in the consciousness of an agent, how I experience. So the most important thing from a phenomenological point of view is the emphasis on experience, how people experience things. The second is bracketing the natural attitude, the assumption that there is an objective world which is populated with distinct objects, and somehow if you bracket this, then you wonder how this world comes about. That's what Carl Weick did in his classic book, The Psychology of Organizing. Until Weick, we used to think of organizations as entities, as structures. There comes Weick and tells us, no, what you experience as organization comes about because of the way people interact, the way people make sense, and they converge in the mapping of the world they experience. What is important, therefore, is how the everyday world with which we are entwined appears to us in our engagement with the world, as opposed to the world as it appears to the spectator. So from a phenomenological point of view, it is not you independently of the phenomenon, as it were, but you are concerned to see how people, those whom we study, how they engage with the world. And of course, realizing that the theoretical structures, when we reflect the reflective consciousness of the world, are rooted in the pre-reflective experience that we obtain through involvement with the world. In other words, as a practitioner myself, I have a pre-reflective experience of how I relate to my tasks and my job, which is rooted in my way of being in my profession. I reflect on it consciously only when something goes wrong or when I cannot get done what I want to get done, and so on. So that's why phenomenologists place heavy emphasis on anomalies and disruptions, because it is through those anomalies that we begin to reflect as practitioners on what we experience. I will not go through. I want to be more quicker here. So I will skip one or two slides. So the consequences of this view, the phenomenological view, is that the subject-object relation is not our the human's most basic way of relating to the world. In other words, if we want to study someone, we better study those individuals in practice. Because the primordial, the fundamental way of being in the world, it is being in the world. It is, you are not independent from it. As a teacher, I don't stand outside. I am already into my practice. I'm not outside it. I'm constituted by it. So our most basic form of being is entwinement. Interrelating. We are always already entwined with others and objects in specific practices. We are always already entwined with the technology we use as teachers, with our colleagues in our professions, with the kind of meanings that are embedded in our practice. And being entwined with the world makes it possible for something to be at all, to be intelligible as something. PowerPoint gets its meaning in a class because it is part of the practice of teaching. Like the hammer gets its meaning for a maintenance technician because it is part of his maintenance job working for a car company, for example. So entwinement is the logic of practice. For something to appear at all, to be at all, to be intelligible, it needs to be seen as part of a practice. So what is the logic of practice? First, it is a teleological structure of practice worlds. People, agents, individuals are always embedded into practice world, that is, into a relational totality, which I described before. Other people, materials, and technology interwoven, entwined into practice worlds, which are teleologically structured. As teachers, we do what we do for the sake of something. There's a purpose in underlying practices. There's people are always immersed in the background, which is already defined distinctions about what matters, what is trivial, what is important, how should I relate to my students, and vice versa, how should I relate to my colleagues, and so on. These are parts of the distinctions about what matters, which constitute the practice in which people are embedded. In my case, in your case, being a teacher. Also, being part of a practice, it is to realize certain internal goods. In education, we know this very well. Education in itself, educating people, is an internal good of the practice that in which we engage. And also standards of excellence. What constitutes excellence differs, of course, across time and space, but nonetheless, when you enter a practice, you always make an effort to move towards some kind of standards of excellence which are operative in the practice. And of course, the use of activities and tools. The logic of practice is manifested through temporary breakdowns. When people are absorbed in what they do, like I am absorbed now in my presenting to you, you are absorbed when you teach in your class, then you respond spontaneously, people respond spontaneously to the solicitations of the tasks they are involved in. They are engaged in what philosophers call absorbed coping. When, however, there is a disruption, let's say the PowerPoint breaks down, or there's a disruptive student in class, or something goes wrong, then people sit back within the practice, within a practical domain in which they still operate, but then they begin to reflect more consciously on what they do. Until my PowerPoint breaks down, I don't think about the PowerPoint at all. It's almost transparent to me. I begin to reflect on it when something goes wrong. So thematic deliberation is a way of coping with a disruption, an anomaly, while we're still part of the practice. We want to get things done. When, however, the disruption goes on, then we engage in theoretical detachment, in which case then we become fully subjects outside of the object. And then we make hypotheses as to why this error occurred, how it may be rectified, and so on. But this is we're no longer part of the practice. We are standing outside the object, trying to identify any associations. So the features of an activist theorizing, if we take phenomenology seriously, and we engage in an activist, what I call an activist theorizing, we need to be concerned with the following: with how people are entwined with others and things in practice worlds, how they relate to others, that phenomena are not treated as fait accompli, but are constantly recreated through action. We have seen this with some seminal research on routine dynamics, for example, or Weick's work on sense making, and all this work on sense making. Concepts are not fully defined a priori, but are partly emergent creations. It's no accident that we talk about routines in action, technology in practice, strategy as practice, and so on. This is to indicate that the concepts we use do not fully define the phenomenon we investigate, but the phenomenon itself can be, because of its situational uniqueness, may have properties which are not part necessarily of the concepts we use. And of course, we try to capture singularities, once-off novelties, those moments in which something new is created out of something given. This doesn't have to be big. Anytime someone does something, says something new in a particular context, then we can capture those moments of singularities. And this is actually some of the most illuminating research in that sense.
Sorry, Haridimos, to interrupt you. You asked me to inform you when you had 10 minutes left. So at the moment we have 8 minutes to the end of
excellent. Thanks.
Of the panel.
And we will have another 10 minutes for Q&A?
No, it's 10 minutes overall.
Overall, well, then I'm about to finish then. I will not go through all what I wanted to say. Then what is the purpose of phenomenologically informed theorizing, which hopefully makes a difference? It's very simple. It is to disclose how practitioners are ordinarily involved in a practice world. What is already people do? Individuals who are embedded in a practice, it is to show how their activities are accomplished. And this is, and to disclose the significance of those distinctions that, the significance for them of the distinctions they use. So the theory that makes a difference, I'm concluding with this, it is the theory which aims to elucidate things. That means to disclose the role of agency in the ongoing enactment of reality. That is, draw people's attention to what they already do. Secondly, reminding people of the actions they have already been carrying out. And thirdly, provide them with the means to re-articulate their patterns of action. I have several examples to which I will stop here because of time restrictions. But I can tell you the sense-making research, some research on innovation, on tacit knowledge and others types of research we draw on in one way or another on phenomenology and try to remind and articulate and describe what people already do, and therefore providing practitioners with a way of re-articulating what they do so that they can do it better. But we can discuss it in the next 6 minutes. Thank you, Antonella.
Okay, great, Haridimos. Great presentation, very inspiring for everybody, I think, and I enjoyed it particularly. It's a pity we have limited time and time constraints, because we would like to listen to you for hours.
Thank you.
So we already have a question in the chat from Francesco Calza about do you think cross-cultural research is a useful tool to approach phenomena? Absolutely.
The cross-cultural research is all about understanding different practices. If you see, from a phenomenological angle, the unit of analysis is practices. What people who are embedded in practices do and how they use tools. So that in itself, if you place it across different cultures, then these practices will be constituted differently in different cultural contexts. The cultural context is formative of the practices that we want to focus on. So I see great promise there, absolutely. And we have already seen pieces of research in different contexts, about safety in Italian factories, about manufacturing, the use of manufacturing techniques in Japanese plants vis-a-vis American plants, and so on. The cross-cultural element comes in.
Mm-hmm. Certainly. I think that, I don't know what's your opinion, Haridimos, but I think there is a lot of room for applying phenomenology in our studies. I'm more an international business and entrepreneurship scholar. So at least in the field I know, which is different from organization studies, there are very, very few studies applying phenomenology. And I wonder why, so if there is some discipline-specific issue there. But I think there could be a lot of, also because I recently saw a call from Jonathan Doe about we need phenomenon-based research in international business and in our studies. But of course, it's not clear if having more phenomenon-based research implies using phenomenology. I mean,
not necessarily.
Yeah. Okay.
Not necessarily, because the word phenomenon is very generic. You don't necessarily approach it phenomenologically. If you take the phenomenon seriously, you have to take the human experience seriously.
Yeah.
So if you study improvisation, if you study knowledge management, organizational learning, entrepreneurship, then you have to take the point of view of agency. That's why phenomenology puts emphasis on agency and what people do, and the way they experience what it is that they engage in. Yeah.
I wonder if there are more questions from the public. I don't see the Q&A feed, so I kindly ask the organization if they can help. Meanwhile, I have an additional question to raise, because I'm a very modest scholar in using phenomenology. I'm fascinated by it. I devoted my last 4 or 5 years into knowing more. I also wrote a paper and so tried to practice. At the beginning, I came across phenomenography. So I always wondered, phenomenology, phenomenography, what are the possible similarities?
I don't see them as different. I see phenomenography as more kind of methodological twist. I think Jürgen Sandberg and Van Manen and a few others who have used that term. It hasn't caught on. I haven't seen that term used again and again. But when people have used it, I think it is the methodological twist on phenomenology. So taking phenomenology and applying it into an empirical context, and they describe it as phenomenography. Personally, I use the term synonymously. I don't make a distinction.
Thank you. We have a question from Vilma Nastekiene asking, in practice, sometimes there are 2 formal tools and procedures and informal ones. Is it talk to compare them both?
I think from a phenomenological point of view, one would like to know how the formal tools are used, and also the informal actions or practices people engage in. If you take the research on organizational routines, which I find one of the most exciting areas of research from a routine dynamics point of view. Routine dynamics scholars study how routines are enacted, how they're performed. There are formal procedures for doing so, any routine, budgeting routine, hiring routine, whatever it is. But also people make use of informal ways which are not specified from the point of view of phenomenological research, and one does not necessarily make the distinction between the two, because the two are all into the process of enacting, performing something. So I would like to know how the formal tools prescribed by the organization are used into practice, and how people adapt the tools, and by adapting them, what kind of informal practices may come up with. So it's all part of the same continuum, part of the same phenomenon.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Haridimos. I think our time is over, but if there are questions, maybe we can still pick them up and then send them to you.
Yeah.
So I think we can close here the plenary, and again, questions will be collected, forwarded to you. Thanks again, Haridimos. Very, very inspiring talk. A lot of food for thought for everybody, and new research perspectives, new meanings to our daily work as researchers.
Thank you.
Thanks also on behalf of SIMA, Italian Management Association.
Thank you, and I hope we meet in person.
I hope soon.
Before not too long.
I hope soon, Haridimos. Thank you, and thanks everybody for